zooming out a little bit, Riot's aspiration as a game company is to make games that are really epic and reach millions and millions of players. And I think when we think about what are some of the reasons why games can't reach the audience that they should, a big answer is actually not just platform, but also just the price of the game, right? So I think with that goal in mind, we think it's really important, and we're one of the unique companies available to make great free-to-play games and make them into a sustainable business. So with League of Legends, with Teamfight Tactics, Valorant, and now us, Legends of Runeterra, I think we all have aspirations to reach a ton of players and are pretty confident in finding ways to be a sustainable business while doing that. Okay. So internally, actually, that's a really hot topic. One of the aspirations, one of our goals for this year is to basically create a lot of new, like what we call formats and basically ways to play the game, like new game modes. Turbo Timers is definitely a variant that we have talked about. It's very divisive insofar as we don't know if players will like it or hate it, but similar to what's it called in Legends, in League of Legends, Earth mode, right? I think that would kind of be our equivalent. So it's definitely something that we want to try, but we don't necessarily think it'll be for casual players. If anything, it'll be for like really hardcore players. It's almost like I don't know if you're familiar with chess, but like chess blitz, right, where players are playing with like really fast timers. So I think that's an easy place for us to go to. TBD if it ends up reaching players and who will enjoy it. Yeah, so this kind of I think goes back to your first question around like why do we decide to make a free-to-play game, and like why do we think a free-to-play experience can be great, right? So at the end of the day, like we want to ensure that all players can compete in the game and pursue and complete decks that they are interested in chasing. And so we basically have some internal goals for how long should it take for a player to obtain not just one card, but like a whole deck of cards, or even an entire set. And we've seen this for some of the players in our open beta, where players actually we're about to openly launch the game, and players have completed the entire set free to play already. And so in general, I would say we're really happy with, bless you, we're really happy with the amount of generosity and just like the ability for players to pursue cards and decks that they want right now. But again, a lot of that is based on the metrics that we have and the player sentiment. If that changes, our goal is to make those things true. So if that sentiment changes, like we'll update our business model as well, and the progression pacing. Definitely immediately highlight the fact that the game is based on the League of Legends IP, and we leverage the champions from that League IP and put them at the forefront. So unlike any other card game, our game really highlights these, basically unique characters and essentially superheroes, and builds all of the cards around them, right? So what is awesome about Legends of Runeterra is not just players getting access to playing these like superhero cards, but also the fact that all the other cards basically act to extend to support them in gameplay, but also extend the world of the League of Legends IP, so that players develop a deeper understanding of that character and all of the relationships that character has with other people in the world, as well as like the setting and all of their backgrounds. So League of Legends IP, I think, is a top one, both because of the quality of the IP and the way that we execute against it. But then the second thing I would highlight is we really focus on this sort of idea of like conversational gameplay, where it's a little bit more like chess or checkers, where you take one or two or a small number of actions, and then I have the opportunity to act and react to you, and we kind of go back and forth. And the aspiration there is that you kind of learn something about your opponent at the end of the game, or by the end of the game, and you have basically opportunities to come to understand kind of like how they like to think and react to that, and basically outplay them, and on a more personal level than I think other card games, which are kind of like often can feel like you're playing against a robot. as a designer, my initial answer wants to actually say gameplay, but I actually think that at the end of the day, if you have gameplay and it's not resonant, it kind of doesn't. It kind of is meaningless. Like when I say that Riot wants to make games that reach a lot of players, I think the goal is not just to reach them, but it's like to make a meaningful impact on them and their lives. Like we want to create experiences that help players create memories about playing the game or playing with friends or about reaching new competitive heights. And so it's really hard to do that if you and I were just playing the game with a bunch of like black and white text with no fantasy attached to it, right? Like if we don't become emotionally invested in the characters that the gameplay is trying to represent, like in many ways, like it's kind of for nothing. And so I do think there is a balance, but I kind of surprised myself when you asked this question because I think, the success is measured again. Our success is actually most measured against, when a player has a character that is their favorite character, did we succeed in bringing that character into this game and representing them and meeting, or even exceeding those expectations that player had about that character, right? And we see that with a lot of the champion previews that we did for the global launch and the new set, Rising Tides, where when players were most delighted was when they had expectations about a character based on their League of Legends experience, and we hit them out of the park, and they were just blown away by how much of that character that they love we could bring into our game successfully. And Dylan and Will, you guys can't tell the designers that was my answer.
Fear not, your secret is safe. Until it gets published.
Yeah. That's a good question, though. I hadn't answered that one before, so hopefully we'll see if they read this one. Yeah, I would say that there is an emphasis on new players whenever we launch the game in a new region or whenever we launch on a new platform, like how we're launching it on mobile right now. But that's often because that's where we expect to get the most new players and the most people trying the game out. Beyond those moments of launching to a new audience, really our focus is on investing and making sure that the current players who currently love the game have even more things to like about it. And I think the reason for that is because the players that play the game today aren't just our players, they're also our champions and our advocates for helping bring the game to new players, right? Like in many ways, I think League of Legends and what we aspire to be is a game that reaches a lot of players because somebody's friend told them that the game was so amazing that they couldn't help but tell them about it and help them overcome those barriers. And so I think League of Legends is a very complex game, and I would argue this is not shots fired, but I would argue it does not have a great new player experience, but it succeeded despite that because the game was so focused on being awesome for the people who could overcome those barriers that those people were compelled to bring their friends into the game, right? And so similar to them, Legends of Terra is not an easy game to learn, right? There's a ton of barriers, not just in terms, we've removed the price one, but the game is still quite complicated to learn, and losing, happens a lot, right? It's going to happen like half the time. And so our focus is on making that the game as fun as possible for people who overcome all those things, and then sort of the second step is for giving those players reasons to be social and to pull their friends into the game. So we're really more focused on that. But all that being said, for launch, we do have new player features. We do have new features that are focused on new players. Things like we have new tutorials and new challenges and puzzles to basically help players learn the mechanics more easily in a single player environment. And we've also added like new player we're doing like a release celebration rewards, so people can log in and get rewards for the first 7 days of the launch. And then finally, we're actually adding catch-up experience systems so that players who are just starting will basically be able to accelerate their collection and be able to catch up with existing players more quickly. So while our focus is on existing players, by and large, most of the time, we still find opportunities to help new players get caught up when we can. What I can say right now is that we are actively, when we talk about trying to make games that last for a really long time and reach millions of players, we often talk about like what are the vectors in which we can do that. And one of the big ones is by making games that have a really high mastery ceiling and creating ways for players to basically show off that mastery, right? And so, of course, esports is one of the major ways to do it. But I think how each game pursues esports will vary, right? So, like our esports program will look different than League's, will look different than Valorant's, and I think that's correct because obviously these games are very different. But it is also a reflection of these teams are independent teams that basically we have centralized resources and we try to knowledge share, but really I think one of the great things working at Riot is each team owns kind of the destiny of their game, and there isn't like necessarily like a really top down kind of like prescription of how do we do X. Like there's no one saying you have to do esports this way because League does it this way, right? And so we're basically today we're actively discussing and exploring the options for all of our esports plans, including basically like who could our partners be, as well as like what would the format be. And so unfortunately we don't have concrete details to share other than we're looking into it actively. Affected Legends of Runeterra, that goes back to kind of what I referenced where happily all of these teams have been teams for a while working on their own games for a while. There are centralized like pieces like technology that have been built by basically a separate team so to help all games ship, but otherwise like nobody that works on Legend of Runeterra also works on Valorant and vice versa. So happily, while it may look like the sort of like player attention is split, like our attention, my attention and the attention of my team is very exclusively focused on Legends of Runeterra, and the same is true for the Valorant team. I think fortunately they didn't affect our launch plans. Like late April was basically the date that we had always written in our minds, but that in many ways is due to like the super heroic efforts of the entire Legends of Runeterra team, as well as Riot as a whole. When COVID hit, West Los Angeles, I think it went from like in my mind it was like we heard about it, and then 2 weeks later the entire company of like 2,000 plus people went from coming to work every day to working from home, and everybody was basically up and running. And so, of course, those 2 weeks were a really big disruption in terms of like all of the cooperation and work processes that each team had built with each other. But by and large, I think we've found some semblance of normal working from home since then. And so the team rallied and was able to, I think make sure that the launch experience was going to be an incredible one for our players, and we're hoping that it ends soon, because there absolutely is like some friction to not being able to just walk to somebody's desk, but we've managed so far. Game-wise, we have a lot of ambitious projects for Legends of Runeterra coming this year. At a high level, we're not ready to share details yet, but the sort of aspirational note is basically we want Legends of Runeterra to be a game where players feel like there's always something new around the corner. Our aspiration is to deliver something new to players every month, whether that's like new cards, new competitive experiences, new play modes, like new card reworks and new balance updates, what have you. And I think we've used this open beta period from late January till now to really prepare ourselves to be ready for that and feel like we've had enough practice providing updates to the players to be capable of something like that. So we'll share more details in the next month or so, but I'm personally super excited about it.